Racial disparity.
On racial disparity.
Racial disparity is
racial disparity.
Racial disparity in the races of the IRS.
in New York City's elite public high schools.
It is tempting to assume that the racial disparity in STEM is simply just because of people's individual choice and their culture.
I didn't really have a passion for STEM growing up. I enjoyed it, but not as much as I enjoyed other things.
Many students similar to Veronica share the same sentiment as her. This in turn is what creates the previously mentioned assumption that some groups simply aren't interested in STEM. Although that may be true, the assumption fails to acknowledge a deep-rooted systemic racism seen in the US that discourages certain groups from pursuing STEM.
Systemic racism is when a group of people have less opportunities, not because of individuals being racist, but entire systems being racist. These systems are often either political, economic, or social systems.
These racist systems contribute to the factors that aid in the racial disparity seen in STEM. Factors such as selective immigration policies, a gap in educational attainment, and the lack of representation for already underrepresented groups. These factors coincide and build off of each other to create something called the model minority myth.
Minority myth. It claims we are the best minority, the hardest working group in the country, and the one that causes the least trouble in America.
The model minority myth creates unnecessary racial division. In a field that is supposed to represent innovation and collaboration, it is being held back by something so outdated. Unfortunately, many of the systems in the US are long outdated, especially immigration policies. Specifically, the H-1B visa program.
H-1B visa allows U.S. employers to hire foreign professionals in so-called specialty occupations, jobs that require at least a bachelor's degree, often in fields like computer science, engineering, or medicine. The idea is to fill labor shortages in areas where U.S. workers may be scarce by bringing in other individuals with skills not otherwise available in the domestic workforce.
You may be thinking, this is a good thing. Wouldn't bringing in immigrants promote diversity in American STEM fields? Yes, in theory it would. However, what ends up happening though is that companies will hire from specific countries like India and China and rarely anywhere else in the world. We also have the data to back that.
According to USCIS data, over 70% of H-1B holders in 2024 were Indian.
And if we look at the Department of Labor statistics for H-1B visas, it paints a clear picture to what field those H-1B workers are going to. We can see that an overwhelming majority of those approved visas were for STEM or STEM-related fields. The issue is not Chinese and Indian immigrants using the H-1B program to get into STEM fields. The issue is that companies are using the H-1B program to racially filter and selectively choose countries like India and China to fill in the labor gap rather than investing into domestic talent.
Federal policy allows billion-dollar corporations to hire foreign workers at under-market wages instead of paying American workers full wages. So if we can start to frame the conversation that way and understand the system is broken, it needs to be reformed.
The system is broken. It creates a false narrative that only furthers the model minority myth, that the most qualified workers come from Asia. In turn, it turns focus away from the growth of African American and Hispanic talent. It also puts an unrealistic expectation on Asian groups that they have to succeed because others, quote, just like them, succeed as well.
So entrenched and just like kind of part of the DNA of I think both our communities, where they see us one way, we're seen a different way. So it's actually, it really puts us against each other.
The US and companies alike are so focused on bringing people in, they fail to acknowledge the people that are already here. By allocating time and resources and fostering an immigrant workforce, it takes those resources from invaluable STEM education that occurs during K through 12. This causes an educational attainment gap that only furthers the racial disparity seen in STEM.
Schools in predominantly white districts receive $23 billion more in funding than schools in non-white districts. Advocacy group EdBuild reports that equals to about $2,200 more in funding per student in predominantly white districts.
We can see the consequences a lack of funding can have. A study conducted to see the racial and ethnic disparities in advanced science and mathematics achievement during elementary school found that a disproportionate number of African American and Hispanic students displayed lower levels of achievement in STEM than their white and Asian classmates. This disparity can be seen with the standardized test scores for math for African American and Hispanic students in Virginia.
Meanwhile, in math, less than 55% of Black and Hispanic students passed, compared to white and Asian students who had a pass rate of around 80%.
Some may look at this data and argue that it is simply a pattern of individual disinterest for STEM seen across African Americans and Hispanics. And if we look at this report conducted by Common App, it is tempting to assume that African Americans and Hispanics are simply not interested in STEM. But for a pattern to repeat over and over again across specific racial lines, it cannot be blamed on an individual, but on the system.
In some instances, Black and Latino students attend schools that do not offer these advanced courses.
If the schools don't receive the funding, the schools won't have the courses. And if the schools don't have the courses, the students won't be able to take the classes. It's as simple as that. African American and Hispanic students will obviously be educationally disadvantaged if they're not getting the same opportunities.
But according to the latest U.S. Government Accountability Office investigation of K-12 education, schools are becoming highly segregated again. More than a third of students attend schools where 75% or more students are of a single race or ethnicity.
This educational gap and assumption that African Americans and Hispanics are uninterested and don't succeed in STEM, but white and Asian groups do, only reinforce the model minority myth, even though it is the system at fault, not them. Selective immigration policies and educational barriers compound to a lack of representation in STEM.
New data shows Black and Hispanic workers continue to remain underrepresented in the STEM workforce. That's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Hispanic adults make up just 8% of that field. Black adults make up 9%.
It creates a sense of doubt among underrepresented communities. Because they are underrepresented in STEM, they feel like they don't really belong in STEM.
It's still a field that's dominated by white males. For our underrepresented students, the problem starts with a lack of exposure to STEM opportunities, continues on with an underpreparation for college-level STEM courses, and then ends with a sense of isolation within the field.
It is important to nurture an environment that feels inviting. Having mentors in STEM can help nurture this environment. Quote, engaging students in mentored learning communities and encouraging them to participate in research can promote retention in STEM. This is especially true for students from backgrounds that are underrepresented in these fields, including students from educationally or socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds.
When I am most personable, my students are also able to open up and talk about themselves, and I'm contributing to a generation of not only people who might be scientists, but also people who go out into the world and take on many different disciplines, and I'm encouraging them to also be their whole selves in their field.
The power of a role model is undeniable. However, because of the model minority myth, it makes it nearly impossible for underrepresented groups to have someone to look up to because it focuses the spotlight on primarily Asian groups. STEM can be welcoming. However, it seems to many that their background prevents them from being welcomed. The model minority myth only adds to this. It gives birth to a never-ending racial cycle by creating tension between racial groups to compete against each other. It creates a false narrative that only certain groups belong in STEM. This false narrative creates racial stereotypes that discourages marginalized groups from pursuing STEM. Due to the lack of participation by marginalized groups, it creates an excuse for companies to only hire from certain countries and ignore home talent. Since home talent is being ignored, it creates groups that are economically and educationally disadvantaged. It then repeats a never-ending cycle. However, it is within our power to cause change. America is supposed to be the land of opportunity, so it is our job to ensure that it is. By advocating for change, by putting mentors in STEM, by making sure the color, creed, race, and religion of a person is not a barrier to success.